this companion, that you have it in yourself, that Allah created you with it. He said, وَإِنَّمَا الْحِلْمُ بِالتَّحَلُّمِ. Al-hilm, which is forbearance, to have forbearance, which is one of the great qualities of a person, is بِالتَّحَلُّمِ, meaning by acquiring the means to attain it. And at-tahallum, at-tafa'ul, that means you have to put the effort to acquire this quality, even if it's not in you. So you keep on acting like those who have hilm. You act, you physically do actions, you with your speech you say things to show that you are from the people of al-hilm, those who have forbearance, those who are not in haste in punishing people or judging people, but rather they have patience, they overlook, they pardon. Even if it's against yourself, you don't find it at ease with yourself. You find yourself struggling so much with it. Different than someone has it in himself, right? So someone doesn't have it in his heart, but he knows that this is a quality that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves. So he forces himself and he seek help from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Even if he have to do some takalluf, going out of his way to do it. But with ilm, with knowledge, to know exactly how can a person have this quality. Then he keeps on struggling with himself and making dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then he will have al-hilm. Then it becomes a sajiyya, then it becomes a norm, then it becomes a khuluq, as innama al-hilmu bit-tahallum. You want to have hilm? Once a person have al-hilm, which is just an example. If you have al-hilm, that means you have it as it's a natural way. You have it without any struggle with it. It becomes your norm. How did a person attain this? Bit-tahallum. With at-tahallum. With taking the efforts and the means to achieve it. This is the case with all actions done by the heart. The physical actions, it's obvious, is very clear. You have difficulty coming to the masjid, make yourself come to the masjid. After a month, after 2 months, after 3 months, becomes your norm. You'll hate yourself if you miss the salah in the masjid intentionally, right? So physical actions are very clear. But what really matters is what's in the heart. So the same thing works with the heart. But the difference is, with the physical actions and the hearts, everything is by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but al-qulub, the hearts, are by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So if a person is taking the means and he is seeking help from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will make it happen. So the subject of that, so that we don't get confused. And some people, when they deal with these matters, like the extremists of the Sufis and the like of this, they talk about the Wahhabi and the Kasbi like this. The people of Ahl Sunnah, the matter is very clear. If Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ordered us to have a certain quality, that means it's attainable. لا يكلف الله نفسا إلا وسعها. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did not put upon us any command that we don't have the capacity for it. So no excuse for someone to say, I can't have it. It's not in me. I am this and that. Right? There's no such a thing. A person just needs to know how to take the means to achieve it. And that's why, as also one of the two principles in matters of deeds done by the heart or anything, there is the two great terminologies that the ulama mention. It's something that is Sheikh Albani rahimahullah was famous in saying it all the time, that the ummah is in need of at-takhliyah wa at-tahliyah. And the same thing applies with any quality that you want to have. We're talking in general here, but these things are important. So you get the first point about the deeds done by the heart, or to have it in the heart, you have to earn it. You have to take the means according to the Quran and the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. The second thing is, whatever good quality that a person wants to have towards others, there is something in the deen called at-takhliyah versus at-tahliyah. At-takhliyah is that you remove the opposites. Stay away from the opposite of this quality that you want to attain. So if you want to have clean hearts towards others, that means you have to clean your heart from the evil things. As the Prophet ﷺ, he said, لا تباغضوا ولا تحسدوا, and the hadith in Sahih Imam al-Bukhari, ولا تدابروا وكونوا عباد الله إخوانا ولا يحل لمسلم أن يهجر أخاه فوق ثلاث. لا تباغضوا, that means don't hate one another, but it's not quite that meaning is broader than that. لا تباغضوا, that means do not hate one another, and it also means, which is very clear in how the verb is mentioned, that means do not take the means that would cause for you to hate one another. So therefore, to stay away, this is the meaning of at-takhliyah. Stay away from the things that would make you hate one another. What are the things that would make you hate one another? Then you can count many different things, and it's all in the deen of Allah. One of which, for example, su'u al-dhan. Stay away from su'u al-dhan, having bad thinking about others, bad expectations of others, which is something mentioned in the Quran. And this is a huge subject. We have verses in the Quran, a hadith of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Ya alladhina amanu ijtanibu kathiran min al-dhan. Inna ba'da al-dhanni ith. Stay away. Quran is recited in this. Stay away from al-dhan, thinking evil about others, because some of it is sinful. And al-dhann akdhabul hadith, as the Prophet ﷺ said, it's one of the most lying of speech. And many evidences, and the Sahaba radiallahu anhum, how they were upon this when it comes to the dhann and the statements of the Sahaba radiallahu anhum, and how would they make sure that this is something, it's a huge subject, right? So maybe this is by itself, we need to learn, not just to keep it open and general like this. We need to learn how to stay away from su'u dhan. So this is one of the means that can make people hate one another, whether they are the closest to one another, husbands and wife and things like this, or brothers in the same masjid, or the entire ummah of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. And then we can count how many things, or what are the things that causes people to hate one another. Sometimes it seems, or it looks like, as if someone had afflicted by a sihr, meaning people are very kind to each other, husband and wife, spouses, or people in the same masjid. And then all of a sudden, they become enemies to one another, or they act as if they hate each other so much. And very easy to blame, oh, there's a sihr, there is this and that, even though there is sihr, of course, it's valid. But one of the interesting things is that the Prophet ﷺ, when he talked about an-namima is what? They call it slander maybe, but an-namima is naql al-kalam, when you take someone's words and you take it to someone else, ala wajh al-waqi'ah, to make them hate each other. Whether intentionally you're doing this, or you know that this will cause the hearts to be against one another. You hear you standing with a brother and he says, this brother is this and that. He might be sincere, he might not, it doesn't matter, whatever there is. Then you take these words and then you go to the brother, you know that this brother is saying this about you. What's going to happen? They're going to say, MashaAllah, Jazakumullah khairan, and they go hug each other. Of course, they be against each other. So, an-namima, when you take the words of someone to the other person, and that causes for them to have enmity. The Prophet ﷺ, he said in the authentic hadith reported by Imam Muslim, أَلَا أُنَبِّئُكُمْ الْعَضْهِ. Al-'adh is basically one of the meanings of a sihr, as if it has the effect of a sihr. Namima does this. Namima does or have the same effect. People, they were very kind to each other. They loved each other for the sake of Allah. Homes are established upon this, and then all of a sudden they have enmity towards one another, one of which is because of a namima. So as you see, these are examples, because we need to learn the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and not just to have some general meanings of it, but to go through it, inshallah. And maybe this is in general, but then inshallah ta'ala later we need to take each and every one of these things, any bad quality that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forbade us from being upon, or in the sunnah of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam, and to talk about the evidences of it, and how to understand it, and how to apply it, and to submit ourselves to fulfill this. And this is part of this at-takhliyah, to stay away from what is evil, and never to praise ourselves that we are upon this and upon that. And then at-tahliyah is to adorn ourselves with the good qualities. So if someone adorned himself with something good, but he's still filth inside, it's not going to be pure. So he has to remove and attain. And this is basically what the hadith, as we heard, as the Prophet ﷺ said, لا تباغضوا ولا تحاسدوا. Do not have envy towards one another, and therefore also do not take the means or do the things that makes you have envy towards one another. Even the one that is going to be envied. You should not show to the people all of the favors that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bestowed upon you. Not that you just fear for yourself that someone will envy you, but because you care about your brothers, that they don't fall into the sin of envy. This is a level of purification of the heart, right? You don't want your Muslim brother to fall into al-hasad. So that's why you have to be wise enough what to show and what not to show, so that they don't fall into sins. And of course, to protect yourself from the effect of al-hasad, and this is a major sin. So, لا تحسدوا ولا تدابروا. Do not turn your backs to one another, meaning with al-hujran or boycotting one another and things like this. And also the meaning of it is if you see the translations of the hadith, they say do not hate one another, do not envy. It's not just that. It means do not take the means that would lead you to this. Because al-bughd, once it's in the heart, it's very difficult to remove sometimes. But when it comes to the means before that, it's easy to stay away from it. So that you don't fall into this major one. And then to adorn the heart with وَكُونُوا عِبَادَ اللَّهِ إِخْوَانًا. Be, O slaves of Allah, إِخْوَانًا, brothers. This is the tahliyah. This is the purification. This is where you give the rights of your brothers. This is where you give the salam. You make dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for them. And you ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to remove any ghil or any hatred or anything in the hearts. And fulfilling basically the rights. And there's so many different things like this as when it comes to the subject. I'm just giving examples here and there. And in all types of relationships. One of which is, for example, from the tabi'een, as we always have to be upon the way of the early generations of Islam. He said, a man came and he said, Inni marartu bi fulan. This is the issue of an-namim. I passed by someone and he is cursing you, saying bad things about you. So this Imam Muhammad, he got angry. And he said, Ma wajada ash-shaytanu rasulan ghayrak. The shaitan did not find a rasul, a messenger, except you to bring. He's angry with who? Not the one that backbited him or slandered him. He's angry with the one that is bringing this to him, because that person is committing a sin by saying to him so and so is saying bad things about you. He said the shaitan did not find a messenger except you. Then that man the person claimed that he was saying bad things about him, very soon he came. So that person, the man said salam, he replied the salam and he made it close to him and he sat with him and he talked with him. There's difference between warning someone with the nasiha and Allah knows what's in the heart, versus someone that just wants to cause evil, or he doesn't want to cause this but just this habit. A person has no fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in this matter. And that's why, for example, Fudayl ibn Iyad rahimahullah, he said, ما من أحد أحب الرئاسة إلا حسد وبغى. Not to take the means that would lead to envy and hatred. He says no one loved الرئاسة. No one loved to be a leader unless he would envy and he would transgress. And وتتبع عيوب الناس, and he would follow the faults of others. وكره أن يذكر أحد بخير, and he would hate for people to be mentioned with any khair. Why? Because he wants to be the leader of them. The leader, that means only one leader. There's no 5 leaders, only one leader. So if he's the leader, that means everyone has to be underneath him, so he has to step on them. Some people, the only way for them to elevate themselves is by stepping on others. This is their only way. And as we know in the deen of Islam, a Muslim should hate to be the leader. He should stay away from it. He should run away from it, because it's only one person in whatever community, whatever place, whatever countries. So it has to be given to the one that fits the best, not that the one that is seeking the best, whether it's the imama even of the salah. If someone is seeking it, then he should not be given it, but rather it's to be given to the one that the people would see that he deserves it the best or so. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows what's in the hearts. And even the one that can lead the people, this is a very specific matter, he can be less virtue, according to the people even, than someone else. But because he's the one that can give all the time to lead the people, for example, and he becomes the imam al-ratib of a place. It doesn't mean that he's the best of them and we have to choose the best, but someone that fits the criteria. And therefore he has the right, of course, to lead and not others. And things like this. But what's in the heart? A person doesn't seek this. And if a person wants to seek any form of a leadership, again, as he said here, and this is how they understood these matters and how they ran away from it, but it has to be given. And once a person is given to him, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will help him. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will make it easy for him, but not to seek. And that's why, with all open honesty and things like this, among the Muslims, among ourselves, this fighting and struggling to be in a leadership. Why is that? We're supposed to be away from this. We're supposed to be running away from it, not to fight over it. And also the Prophet ﷺ used to make dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because one of the means to achieve this tranquility in the heart is to make dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. and one of which is waslul sakhimata qalbi, one part of some long dua that the Prophet ﷺ would ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to remove any traces of unease in his heart towards anyone. And that's the Prophet ﷺ. And the Prophet ﷺ, when in the authentic hadith, when it shows also the humbleness of the Prophet ﷺ. And this is a sound one. When the Messenger ﷺ was كان يسوي الصفوف في غزوة بدر. He was making the rows straight in the battle of Badr. And he had in his hand ﷺ something like a stick or something that he's making the rows straight. So one of the people, he was kind of sticking out from the row. So the Prophet ﷺ moved him back. So he says, "Stawi ya Sawad." His name was Sawad. Stawi, make your place straight. So he said, "Radiallahu anhu, ya Rasulullah, awja'tani." O Messenger of Allah, you made me in pain because of that stick. So the Prophet ﷺ, he said, وَقَدْ بَعَثَكَ اللَّهُ بِالْحَقِّ وَالْعَدْلِ فَأَقِدْنِي. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent you with the truth and justice. فَأَقِدْنِي, let me get even. You made me hurt my stomach. So فَأَقِدْنِي, this is justice. So the Prophet ﷺ فَكَشَفَ عَنْ بَطْنِهِ. Prophet ﷺ exposed his stomach and he said, "Istaqid, go ahead, get revenge." فَاعْتَنَقَهُ سَوَاد. Sawad radiallahu anhu did not, of course, would not ever dare to ask for such a thing. He just wanted to hug the Prophet ﷺ. So he hugged the Prophet ﷺ. So the Prophet ﷺ said to him, "Ma hamalaka ala hadha ya Sawad?" What made you do this, O Sawad? He said, "Ya Rasulullah, حضر ما ترى فأردت أن يكون آخر العهد بك أن يمس جلدي جلدك فدعا له رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم بخير." He said, قد حضر ما ترى. Now we're standing right waiting for the battlefield, for the battle to occur, and you see what that means. So I want it to be the last moment of my life, or the last thing for me is that my skin touches your skin. So the Prophet ﷺ made dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for him. And then the Prophet ﷺ, he said, "Ya ikhwatah, aghdab." Then the Prophet ﷺ, he made dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for him. And even the Prophet ﷺ said in other hadith, in Bukhari and others, that whoever I hurted him, this is zakah for him, this is charity for him, this is rewards for him. So even the Prophet ﷺ would make sure and take the means, even though nobody whatsoever would carry anything towards the Prophet ﷺ, but he would stay away from such a matter. We mentioned this athar before, also from Abu Dujana radiallahu anhu. Abu Dujana radiallahu anhu is famous for being a warrior, if it's correct to say. And the Prophet ﷺ in the battle of Uhud, he gave him a sword when he said, "Man ya'khudh hadha as-sayf bihaqqih." Prophet ﷺ, he took a sword and he said, who would take that sword with the right it ought to be? A heavy responsibility, that he would take that sword and fulfill what's the sword it's supposed to do in the right way. So everybody, was hesitant because this is a heavy responsibility. And it was given to Abu Dujana radiallahu anhu that he used it in the right way, and he showed so much courage and things like this. But with these types of virtue that he was upon and the courage that he had, but when he was dying radiallahu anhu, and he was asked, when he was dying, and he smiled, and they asked him, "Why you smiling?" And he said, and this is important when a person is dying, to have more of a raja, to have more of the hope for the rewards of Allah. It's not the moment where a person should fear more, but rather to hope more, because there's no actions are left, because a person is about to die. So he said something in the meaning of which, that ما من عمل شيء أوثق عندي من اثنتين. Two types of things that is the most strong to me, or the most things that I hope for when it comes to one's actions, that he's returning to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with these two things. And he did not mention that he was in the battles with the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam and things of that nature. He mentioned two things. The first one, he says, كنت لا أتكلم فيما لا يعنيني. I used to not to speak in what does not concerns me. That's the first thing that he, hoping that this will be the mean that would get him into the high level to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I used to not to speak in the things that does not concerns me. And the second one, كان قلبي للمسلمين سليما, that my heart was towards the Muslims saliman, sound and pure, no hatred towards them, no envy towards them. These are the two things that he is dying, asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that this will be the means for his salvation and his purification and so on. And the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam, he said as one or the means to achieve this, ثلاث لا يغل عليهن قلب مسلم. Three things that the heart of the Muslim should not have the ghil or the hatred or the grudges, even the slightest grudges against these three things. The first one, ikhlasul amali lillah, to have the amal sincerely for the sake of Allah, to make sure that al-ikhlas, as we know, does not accept any impurities with it, purely, sincerely for the sake of Allah. The second one, وَمُنَاصَحَةُ أَئِمَّةِ الْمُسْلِمِينَ, and to have the concern towards the a'imma of the Muslimin, the leaders of the Muslimin, the major leaders and whatever leaders, to have the concern towards them, and not to have any unease in one's heart when it comes to this. Make dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guide them, not to make your gatherings always cursing them and talking things like this and that, and that of no benefit whatsoever. There is no benefit, and it's against the way of the people of Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah. Plus, there's no benefit. People, even those who claim this and that, there's nothing whatsoever, just waste of time. And things to be, and even if someone says this, then they start having something in their hearts towards the people that would say this. When it's the words of the Prophet ﷺ. Regardless whether they are the most tyrants or the most evil ones, if they are Muslimin, it's not permissible to get into these types of things. وَلُزُومْ جَمَاعَتِهِمْ, and to be among the jama'ah of the Muslimin, فَإِنَّ الدَّعْوَةَ تُحِيطُ مَنْ وَرَأَهُمْ, because the da'wah surrounds, encompasses them. To be with them, not to do like the evil ones and things like this. I'm going all kinds of different places, but it shows the importance of it. And even in the special relationship between husband and wife, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when he mentioned that, he says, وَلِلرِّجَالِ عَلَيْهِنَّ دَرَجَةً. That part of the ayah in Surah Al-Baqarah, that sometimes people, they feel unease with it when it's the deen of Allah. وَلِلرِّجَالِ عَلَيْهِنَّ دَرَجَةً. Men, they have a level above the women. This is exactly what the part of the verse says. Meaning, being in charge, they have the qiwama, they have this authority in their household, meaning to the men. And it's not an authority of abuse, but it's the total opposite. Someone is in charge. And when we talked about that many times, and the perfect combination is the Prophet ﷺ commanding the men, because they are in charge of their households. They are the ones responsible for it. And the Day of Judgment, the responsibility is upon them, and the responsibility upon the wife and everyone. But they are in charge. He said, "Istawsu bin nisa'i khayra." Take well care of the women. So they're supposed to be in the best manners ever, because they are in charge. So it's not as people might think, because people only see, or they see a lot of those who are in charge, usually they abuse their authority. So they think that's the same thing. This is a passage for the men to abuse their spouses, which is not the case, of course. It's the total opposite. They don't say that when someone works for a company or a CEO deals with the people. But anyway, so and the women to be obedient for their husband in ma'roof and things of that nature. So one of the statements that Ibn Abbas radiallahu anhuma, it was said that he mentioned about this part of the verse, after all of what's mentioned, he said that this daraja, or this level, and I know this is maybe some of the sisters that they hear that, they will use it against their husbands. But he said that this is وَلِرِجَالِ عَلَيْهِنَّ دَرَجَةً, this daraja, he said مَا أُحِبُّ أَنْ أَسْتَوْفِي حَقِّي مِنْهَا. Abdullah ibn Abbas, he said, I don't like to fulfill all of my rights from her. I don't like to fulfill astawfi. That means he get all of his rights from her. It's right. We're not talking about extra or something else. His rights. He doesn't like for that, even though that he is in charge. Right? He does not like for this to be the case. Meaning the daraja, part of the meaning of this daraja, or this level, that the men should overlook and forgive and pardon. But when it comes to the deen, there's no compromise. So the deen of Allah, if the entire world is angry with him, it doesn't matter. He has to apply the deen of Allah and the matters of iffah, matters of chastity, even when it comes to decisions for the household and so on, with consultation, with all kinds of goodness and humbleness, and even making his spouse feel that she's the one in charge. It's okay. But in reality, nothing happens without being done in the right way. And at the same time, overlooking and pardoning, as we heard. But not the other extreme where a person leaves his household for others to be in charge of it, and then the matters is lost when it comes to matters of deen and things like this. And that's why it's one of the great principles of manners, and that brings the tranquility of the heart in that subject, is Al-Hasan al-Basri rahimahullah. He says, مَسْتَقْصَى كَرِيمٌ قَطْ. No kareem, no honored person would ever istaqsa, would ever goes after his rights in every matter. You don't have to get all of your rights taken care in this life. If you can have the ability to overlook sometimes for the better or the goodness that comes as a result of this, and that requires, of course, goodness in the heart first, and to see the benefits and the losses and things like this. Seeking, and part of that is seeking excuses for others, which is another subject. Seeking excuses for others, which is part of the good expectations. As Ibn Sirin rahimahullah said, إِذَا بَلَغَكَ عَنْ أَخِيكَ شَيْءٍ فَالْتَمِسْ لَهُ عُذْرًا. If something came to you from your brother or someone, seek that you don't like, seek excuses for him. فَإِن لَمْ تَجِدْ فَقُلْ لَعَلَّ لَهُ عُذْرًا لَا أَعْرِفُ. If you don't find any excuses that you can make up, he said, you say maybe there's a udhr or an excuse that I do not know anything about. So, and the Prophet ﷺ warned us, especially at times of ease. When times of difficulties, you'd find people with one another together. He said, ﷺ, إِذَا فُتِحَتْ عَلَيْكُمْ فَارِسْ وَالرُّومِ. If Persia and the Romans is now for you, أَيُّ قَوْمٍ أَنْتُمْ. What type of people are you? When you have abundance of wealth and things like this, or power, because usually people, this is where they start to abuse. When they're weak and oppressed, everybody looks nice and kind and everything. And look at how the disbelievers, or how the people of bid'ah even, when they're weak and oppressed, they're the best, and they use something called the taqiyya, lying and things like this. But once they become in charge, they become the worst evil ever. The people of Ahl Sunnah are not like this. The people of the truth are not like this. If they're weak and oppressed, they observe what's supposed to be done. And if they have power, we have in the Prophet ﷺ the best example, when he said, whoever goes to the house of Abu Sufyan, he is safe, and forgiving people entering Mecca with his head in state of sujood, alayhi salatu wasalam. So at all times they observe the rights of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the rights of others, and they never commit any injustices whatsoever, whether they are the most powerful on the face of earth or they are the weakest people on the face of earth, because this is a deen. It's a matter of deen, it's not a matter of human desires. So the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam, أَيُّ قَوْمٍ أَنْتُمْ. What type of people are you when you are in that state? So Abdul Rahman ibn Auf radiallahu anhu, he said, نَقُولُ كَمَا أَمَرَنَ اللَّهِ. We'll say as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commanded us. And naqul, when you mentioned this before, it does not mean to speak. Al-qawl here refers to the actions too. It's not, because they did not use to differentiate or separate between speech and actions. So the Prophet ﷺ, he said, أَوَ غَيْرَ ذَلِكَ. That means we'll apply the commands of Allah. He said, the Prophet ﷺ, or maybe something else. Then he warned. He said, تَتَنَافَسُونَ ثُمَّ تَتَحَاسَدُونَ ثُمَّ تَتَدَابَرُونَ ثُمَّ تَتَبَاغَضُونَ ثُمَّ تَنْطَلِقُونَ فِي مَسَاكِينِ الْمُهَاجِرِينَ فَتَجْعَلُونَ بَعْضَهُمْ عَلَى رِقَابِ بَعْضٍ. تَتَنَافَسُونَ, you compete with one another over worldly matters. Then تَتَحَاسَدُونَ, to take the means to have envy. Then تَتَدَابَرُونَ, you boycott one another. Then you hate one another. Then you go to the masakin, to the poor of the muhajirin, and you kind of make them against one another and to fight against one another. And this matter of warning oneself and being according to what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants from us, and to realize that it's all from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala categorized the believers, the muhajirin and the ansar, and how they don't have any grudges in their hearts towards their brothers from the muhajirin, and those who came after them, which we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us among them. وَالَّذِينَ جَاءُوا مِن بَعْدِهِمْ, those who come after them, they say رَبَّنَا اغْفِرْ لَنَا وَلِإِخْوَانِنَا الَّذِينَ سَبَقُونَا بِالْإِيمَانِ وَلَا تَجْعَلْ فِي قُلُوبِنَا غِلًّا لِلَّذِينَ آمَنُوا. Oh Allah, forgive us and for those who came before us in matters of al-Iman, and do not have any ghil, any grudges, any hatred in our hearts towards the believers. رَبَّنَا إِنَّكَ رَؤُوفٌ رَحِيمٌ. So making dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala upon this. And ending with, again, there's so many statements in the books, whether it's in the Quran, the Hadith, the statements of the early generations of Islam. And inshallah ta'ala, if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will, we can take every single small matter of this and see how what's mentioned in the Quran, what's mentioned in the Sunnah, the Sahaba radiallahu anhum, how did they apply these types of things, whether it's bad, evil sins versus good qualities to be observed, and how to be upon this. But Rajab rahimahullah, he said, أفضل الأعمال سلامة الصدور. One of the best of actions is the cleanliness of the heart, is the purity of the heart towards others. وسخاوة النفوس, to have generosity with oneself. Generosity is when you give someone something. So part of that is that you give from your own self, you overlook, you forgive. والنصيحة للأمة, and to have the concern towards the ummah. وبهذه الخصال بلغ من بلغ, and by these qualities those who reach the highest levels they did. لا بكثرة الاجتهاد في الصوم والصلاة, not by how much salah and siyam they did. And he said, أرأيتم كيف شهد النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم لرجل من أصحابه بالجنة مع شهادة الرجل على نفسه أنه ليس كثير صلاة فما السر في ذلك. The hadith, he says, didn't you see how the Prophet عليه الصلاة والسلام make the witness clearly that this man is from the people of Jannah, when the man himself, he did not say that he makes lots of salah or siyam. The story of the man that the Prophet ﷺ, he said, now a man will come in front of you from the people of Jannah. And Abdullah ibn Umar, he went to him and he stayed with him for 3 days. He did not see any different actions like everybody else. So he mentioned to him that thing is that when he goes at night, he does not have anything in his heart towards anyone whatsoever, any hatred, any grudges, anything of that nature whatsoever. So having this in front of, when it comes to the closest, to the furthest away individuals, and when it comes to all matters, this is what we need to be upon, inshallah ta'ala. And no. And the early generations of Islam, they didn't surpass necessarily with physical actions, even though they were the best in this. They عملوا قليلا وكانوا يؤجرون كثيرا. They used to do less than those who came after them, but they were giving lots of reward. Why? Because of this issue in their hearts, because of their purity of their hearts. And to add to this, even with the deviant ones, the people of Ahl Sunnah, خير الناس للناس. They are the best people to the people. If they warn against, sometimes people, they think the people of Ahl Sunnah are harsh because they warn against this person is mubtadi', stay away from him, like this. So they're kind of look like they're evil people. If Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives someone sincerity, and when it comes to saving the religion and being means to do this, a person has to have a clean heart even when he's warning. To save the religion, to be of a nasiha to the people, but not to bring people down or to cause evil or anything of that nature, but actually it's for the goodness of it. And this is when you read also the words of Shaykh Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah in these matters, that when the ayah that we just mentioned, those who come after the companions radiallahu anhum, they say, وَلَا تَجْعَلْ فِي قُلُوبِنَا غِلًّا لِلَّذِينَ آمَنُوا. Allah, do not make in our hearts any ghil, any hatred or grudges against, towards those who believe. He said, the people of Al-Bid'ah are included if they are Muslims. If they are Muslims, they are included in this dua. That means you ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also to make dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for them, even though you warn against them. And you might even boycott them, if that's the benefiting thing to be done, to preserve the deen. But at the same time, if they are within the circle of Al-Islam, they have rights upon you. And one of which is to make dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guide them, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect them, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make them see the truth and so on. Not to have this enmity like the people of Bani Israel and the like of them. So we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make it easy for all of us to discipline ourselves and to be obedient to Allah and to purify our hearts. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make it benefiting, inshallah. So we'll stop here, inshallah. Wa sallallahu sallam baraka Muhammad wa sahbihi wa sallam. سبحانك اللهم ربنا بحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك.